He had trained himself never to react, never to let surprise reach his face, because power depended on control, and control was everything in his world. Yet the moment his eyes fell on the maid's hand, the rules he lived by shattered without warning. The ring was small, almost insignificant, a thin silver band dulled by time and cheap metal, but it burned brighter to him than any diamond he owned. His breath stalled. The glass of water in his hand trembled slightly before he steadied it. Around him, the penthouse was silent, polished, untouchable, a monument to the man he had become, but inside his chest something old and fragile stirred awake. He stared too long, long enough for the maid to notice. She instinctively pulled her hand back, fingers curling inward as if she had been caught stealing, her shoulders stiffening with the quiet fear of someone who had learned her place in the world early and well. She murmured an apology, thinking she had done something wrong, and lowered her eyes to the marble floor. The sound of her voice hit him harder than the sight of the ring. It was calm, gentle, familiar in a way that made his heart pound. He tried to speak, but the words stuck in his throat, tangled in memories he had locked away for decades. He remembered cold nights when hunger gnawed like an animal inside him, remembered standing in soup lines, remembered being invisible. He remembered a girl who had shared half her bread with him when she had barely enough for herself. He remembered laughter echoing between cracked walls, remembered promises whispered like prayers because believing in them was the only way to survive. His gaze returned to the ring, to the tiny scratch near its edge, and recognition struck him with ruthless precision. He had made that scratch himself, clumsy hands slipping as he tried to make the cheap metal look special. "Where did you get that?" he finally asked, his voice lower than usual, stripped of authority. The maid hesitated, unsure if the question was a trap. People like him didn't ask questions without reason. Slowly, she answered, telling him it was something she had owned for a long time. "A promise," she said softly, almost embarrassed by the word. The word promise echoed through him like thunder. He asked who gave it to her, and she smiled faintly, a sad, distant smile that carried years of quiet endurance. "A boy," she said, "poor, alone, but kind. Someone who believed things could change even when the world gave no reason to believe." The room felt suddenly too small, the air too thin. He turned away, pretending to adjust his cufflinks, buying himself a moment to breathe. As a poor orphan, he had sworn that promise with everything he was. "I will marry you," he had said, because saying it had made him feel strong, because it had given shape to a future that otherwise felt impossible. He had meant it then. That truth hurt more than any lie. When opportunity came, when survival demanded sacrifice, he had chosen to run forward and never look back. He had told himself that promises made in desperation didn't count. Looking at her now, he realized how wrong he had been. She stood quietly, waiting for instructions, unaware that she was standing at the center of his past and present colliding. He dismissed the rest of the staff with a wave of his hand, his mind racing. When they were alone, the silence grew heavy, filled with things unsaid. He studied her face, searching for the girl he remembered. Time had changed her, as it had changed him, but her eyes were the same. Honest, resilient, untouched by bitterness. It terrified him more than anger ever could have. He asked her name, though he already knew it, and hearing it spoken aloud sent a sharp ache through his chest. She explained her life in simple terms when he asked, never complaining, never dramatizing the hardship. Work, family, responsibility. Dreams kept small so they wouldn't hurt when reality crushed them. He listened, feeling the weight of his wealth pressed down on him like guilt. Everything he owned, every success he celebrated, had been built on a life that left her behind. When he finally confessed that he, too, had been an orphan, her eyes widened just slightly, surprise flickering before she masked it. She said she was sorry, instinctively offering compassion even to a man who lacked nothing. That was when he froze completely, realizing that even now, she was still the same girl who gave without expecting anything in return. He asked her why she still wore the ring. She hesitated, then answered with honesty that cut deeper than blame. She said it reminded her that once, someone had seen her as worth choosing. That once, someone had believed in a future with her in it. The words settled heavily between them. He understood then that the ring was not a symbol of what she wanted from him now, but of who he had been when he was brave enough to hope. Shame and longing twisted together inside him. Leaving him raw, he told her she could take the rest of the day off, his voice carefully controlled, and she nodded, unsure what else to do. As she walked away, he watched the ring catch the light one last time before disappearing from view. He remained standing long after she left, surrounded by wealth that suddenly felt meaningless. The billionaire who commanded rooms with a glance stood alone, shaken by a promise made by a poor orphan who had believed love could outlast poverty. For the first time in years, he understood that the past had not come back to accuse him. It had come back to ask whether he was finally brave enough to keep his word. Sleep abandoned him that night as completely as he had once abandoned the past. The city outside his floor-to-ceiling windows glowed with endless lights, each one a reminder of deals closed, risks taken, victories won, yet none of them could quiet the storm inside his mind. He paced the length of his bedroom, barefoot on cold marble, the image of that ring replaying again and again until it felt carved into his thoughts. Every step dragged another memory to the surface. The orphanage smelled of damp walls and cheap soap. Winter mornings when breath turned to fog. The sound of his own stomach growling while he pretended it didn't matter. And always her, sitting beside him, offering warmth with nothing more than a smile and half of whatever little she had. He remembered how strong he had felt making that promise, how saying, "I will marry you," had been his way of fighting a world that seemed determined to break him. He sank onto the edge of the bed, head in his hands, and admitted what he had avoided for years. He hadn't just left her behind. He had erased her to survive. Every time success demanded sacrifice, he had chosen ambition and told himself there was no room for sentiment. The lie had worked until now. The ring had ripped it apart. When dawn crept in, he was still awake, exhausted, haunted, and strangely clear. He knew he could not ignore what had happened. Power gave him many choices, but this one felt like a test he could not fail again. The next morning, he watched her work from a distance. She moved through the penthouse quietly, methodical, invisible by design. It struck him how easily the world overlooked people like her, how often he himself had done the same. She cleaned surfaces that reflected his face back at him, polished objects worth more than entire neighborhoods, and asked for nothing in return but her wage. When he finally spoke her name, she startled, as if expecting reprimand. He asked her to sit, and she hesitated before obeying. Perching on the edge of the chair like someone ready to flee at the slightest hint of danger, he began carefully, telling her he recognized the ring because he had once known someone who wore one just like it. Her fingers tightened around the cloth in her lap, but she did not interrupt. He told her he had been poor, then poorer still, then alone. When he said the word orphan, her eyes softened, and something in her expression shifted from fear to understanding. He admitted that he had made a promise once and failed to keep it. His voice did not waver, but inside he felt exposed, stripped of every shield money had ever given him. She listened without judgment, her silence louder than any accusation. When she spoke, her words were gentle, almost apologetic. She said life had a way of breaking promises before they could grow. She said she had never waited for him, not really, because waiting would have meant stopping her own life. She said the ring was not a demand, but a memory, a reminder that kindness could exist even in the darkest times. Each sentence felt like both mercy and punishment. He realized she did not need his guilt. She had built a life without it. He asked her why she stayed in a job that gave her so little recognition. She shrugged and said stability mattered more than pride. She talked about her mother, about bills, about responsibilities that did not pause for dreams. He spoke about boardrooms, about power, about the loneliness that came from never knowing if people cared about the man or the money. Their worlds could not have been more different, yet in that quiet space, they felt strangely aligned. Two survivors shaped by different battles, sitting across from each other, unsure of what came next. Days passed, heavy with awareness. He found himself looking for her, listening for her footsteps, noticing the smallest details. He hated himself for it, afraid of what his attention could mean. He knew the imbalance between them was dangerous, that affection mixed with authority could become something ugly if handled carelessly. Determined not to repeat old mistakes, he made a choice that surprised even himself. One evening, he called her into his office and handed her an envelope. Inside was enough money to free her from worry, to give her options she had never had. He told her there were no conditions, no expectations. She could leave, start over, forget everything if she wished. She stared at the envelope for a long moment, then slowly pushed it back toward him. Her voice was steady when she spoke. She said she did not want to be bought, saved, or pitted. She said she wanted honesty, not charity. The words hit him with the force of truth. He realized that giving money was easy. Facing her as an equal was the real challenge. He asked her what she wanted from him, and her answer was simple. She wanted to know if the promise had ever been real. That he did not hesitate this time. He said yes. He said it had been the most honest thing he had ever said. He admitted he had been afraid then and afraid now, but fear did not erase truth. Tears welled in her eyes, not from hope, but from release. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that her memory had not been foolish, that the ring had not been a lie. When she left the office that evening, nothing was resolved, yet everything had changed. He watched her go, aware that whatever happened next could not be rushed, bought, or forced. The billionaire who once believed survival meant forgetting now understood that survival without integrity was just another kind of poverty. And as the door closed behind her, he knew the hardest part was still ahead, not winning her heart, but proving that the poor orphan who made that promise still existed somewhere inside him. The invitation he extended this time carried no weight of power, no hint of obligation, only simplicity. Dinner, a quiet place, no staff hovering, no cameras, no spectacle. When she arrived, she looked uncertain, not because of where they were, but because she understood how fragile moments like this could be. He greeted her without formality, without the practiced charm he used on investors, and for the first time she saw him not as a billionaire, but as a man trying to stand honestly in his own skin. They spoke slowly at first, words chosen carefully, as if both feared that one wrong sentence might shatter the fragile bridge forming between them. He asked about her childhood, about the years after the orphanage, about the nights she cried silently so no one would hear. She told him everything, not dramatically, not to gain sympathy, but because truth felt safer than silence. Now he listened in a way he had never listened to anyone before, not waiting for his turn to speak, not thinking about outcomes. He felt the weight of every missed birthday, every struggle she faced alone, every version of her life that unfolded without him. When she asked about his journey, he did not glamorize it. He spoke of hunger turning into obsession, of ambition becoming armor, of success slowly hollowing him out. He admitted that wealth had protected him from the world, but had also isolated him from himself. She nodded, understanding more than he expected. Pain, she said quietly, does not disappear just because the surroundings improve. It only changes its shape. The night deepened, the space between them softened. Laughter found its way into the conversation, tentative at first, then freer. It surprised them both. For a moment, the years between the orphanage and now faded, and they were simply two people rediscovering a rhythm they had once known. When their hands brushed across the table, neither pulled away. The contact was light, almost accidental, yet it sent a tremor through him stronger than any deal he had ever closed. He did not promise her anything that night. No grand declarations, no vows. He had learned that real commitment began with patience. Over the following weeks, he made deliberate choices. He stepped back from his authority where she was concerned, ensured her work situation changed not because of favoritism, but fairness. When she decided to leave the job, it was on her terms, with dignity and independence intact. He supported her quietly, not as a rescuer, but as someone who respected her strength. They met often, sometimes talking for hours, sometimes sitting in comfortable silence. Trust rebuilt itself slowly, brick by brick, stronger than anything rushed could ever be. One afternoon, she took him to a small park on the edge of the city. Children laughed nearby, vendors sold cheap snacks, and no one recognized him. Sitting on a worn bench, he felt strangely at peace. She told him she had always imagined this moment differently, with anger, with accusations, with tears. Instead, she felt calm. She said holding onto the ring had never been about waiting for him to return. It had been about honoring the version of herself who believed she deserved love. Hearing that, he understood that the promise he had made as a poor orphan had not just shaped his life, but hers as well. That he asked if she still believed in promises. She looked at the ring, then at him, and said promises were only meaningful when the person making them was willing to grow into them. That night, under the open sky, he took her hand gently, not claiming it, not owning it, but asking permission to stand beside her. He told her he was not asking her to forgive the past or erase it. He was asking for the chance to be present now, to earn trust instead of demanding it. His voice trembled when he repeated the words he had once spoken without understanding their weight. "I will marry you." This time, they were not spoken in desperation, but in responsibility. She did not answer immediately. She had learned that silence could be powerful. When she finally spoke, she said yes, not to the ring, not to the promise alone, but to the man who had returned to himself. Tears filled his eyes as relief washed through him, not because he had won something, but because he had finally chosen rightly. He slipped no new ring onto her finger. The old one remained, worn and imperfect, a bridge between who they were and who they had become. In the months that followed, the world learned their story in fragments, distorted by headlines and gossip, but the truth belonged only to them. In private moments, he often reflected on the strange justice of life, how a billionaire could be undone by a piece of cheap silver, how the promise of a poor orphan could outlast money, power, and time. Standing beside her, he knew that wealth had given him everything except what truly mattered. Love, it turned out, had been waiting patiently, wearing a simple ring, trusting him to finally remember who he once promised to be.